You know what's funny about the moment everything changed? It started with a selfie stick. I'm not even joking. One of those cheap, extendable ones, bright orange, because apparently that wasn't conspicuous enough, and the guy holding it was maybe 6'2", wearing a London is Calling t-shirt that he'd probably bought from a gift shop 20 minutes earlier. His name, I'd find out later, was Derek. From somewhere in Ohio. A big guy. Loud laugh. The kind of person who fills up a room without really trying. But, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that morning. It was late October. One of those London mornings where the sky can't quite decide if it wants to rain or just threaten to, what kind of gray that feels almost personal, like the city itself is watching you and hasn't made up its mind about you yet. The air smelled like whetstone and exhaust fumes and, faintly, the sweet rot of fallen leaves from the park. If you've ever been to London in autumn, you know exactly that smell. It gets into your coat. It follows you home. I'd come down from Edinburgh 3 days earlier, visiting a friend who lives near Pimlico. She worked odd hours at a hospital, and that morning she'd left before 6, so I found myself alone in her flat with a cup of tea that had gone cold and absolutely nothing to do until noon. So I walked. I ended up at Buckingham Palace the way most people do, not really meaning to, just following the path because it seemed to go somewhere interesting. I came in through St. James's Park, past the little bridge where people stopped to photograph the pelicans. The trees had gone golden. Leaves floating down in slow spirals, no wind strong enough to rush them. It was maybe 8:15 in the morning. There weren't many tourists yet. Just a handful, couples mostly, a few joggers cutting through, a school group being herded like anxious ducklings by a teacher in a yellow vest. The palace gates were still quiet. The kind of quiet you only get before the day fully wakes up. And there he was. The guard. He was posted to the left of the main gate, in that iconic sentry box, black and gold, like something from a fairy tale. Full ceremonial uniform. Red tunic, bearskin cap, white gloves, the whole picture. He stood absolutely still. I mean still, the kind of stillness that you only really notice when you're close enough, because from a distance you just assume it's a mannequin or a costume display. But, up close, you can see the chest moving, just barely. You can see the eyes, sharp, fixed, tracking without obviously tracking. He was young. I remember thinking that. Younger than I expected. Maybe 22, 23. Clean jaw. A small scar on his chin, half hidden by the strap of the bearskin. And he had this expression that was almost impossible to read, not angry, not bored, not proud. Just present. Completely, utterly present. I stood back near one of the bollards, just watching for a while. Drinking the last of my cold tea from a paper cup. Waiting for the day to begin. That's when the American group arrived. They came from the direction of the Victoria Memorial, 8 of them, maybe 9. I counted later and lost track because they kept moving around. All ages, an older couple, silver-haired and sensible-looking, a pair of women in their 30s who both had the same tote bag, a young couple, maybe newlyweds, the kind who keep touching each other's arms, 2 teenage boys who already looked bored in the aggressive way teenagers do when they're actually paying attention, and Derek. Derek was clearly the organizer. Or thought he was. He had one of those folded tourist maps, though I never once saw him look at it. He was talking before the group had fully stopped walking, pointing at the palace, pointing at the guard, doing some sort of commentary I was too far away to catch properly. The others were already pulling out phones. The older woman, I'm going to call her Carol because she had the energy of a Carol, had an actual camera. A real one, with a lens. She was pressing it to her face before she'd properly found her footing, bless her. For a few minutes, everything was fine. Normal tourist behavior. People photographed the gate, the fence, the memorial. The 2 teenage boys took what I assumed were ironic photos of each other. The young newlywed husband filmed a slow pan that would almost certainly end up unwatched in a camera roll somewhere. And then, Derek spotted something. Or rather, Derek decided something. I saw it happen in real time, that little shift in his posture, the way he straightened up, smiled to himself, said something to the group. Heads turned toward the guard. A few people grinned. He was going to try to make the guard laugh. Now, look. I'm not going to pretend I haven't seen this before. Anyone who's spent time near a royal sentry box has seen some version of this. Tourists, not just Americans, to be fair, people from everywhere, they see that still, stoic figure and something in them just has to test it. It's almost like a reflex. Like seeing a cat in a box and needing to look inside. I've watched people do impressions in front of guards. Tell jokes. Wave their hands a centimeter from their faces. Sing. Dance. One man in his 50s once did the entire chorus of YMCA while his wife filmed, right in front of a guard at Horse Guards Parade. The guard didn't blink. So I wasn't alarmed when Derek started his performance. I was, honestly, a little entertained. He approached slowly, hands up in mock surrender, the international gesture for I'm being funny, I promise. He got about 2 meters away and started making faces. Pulling his cheeks. Crossing his eyes. The group behind him was laughing, especially the teenage boys, who had apparently found something to be interested in after all. The guard did not move. Derek tried a different angle. He stood beside the sentry box, not in front of it, but to the side, and did this exaggerated impression of the guard's posture. Chest puffed out, chin up, eyes fixed forward, arms rigid. He held it for a few seconds, then broke into a grin to see if anyone, including the guard, was reacting. The guard did not move. The group applauded. Derek bowed. Carol captured it all on her camera with the dedication of a war photographer. And that's when the second teenager, the one who had, up until that point, been the quieter of the two, decided to escalate. His name I never found out. He was maybe 16, 17. Sandy-haired, wearing a hoodie from what looked like an American university, sleeves shoved up to his elbows. He had the confident carelessness of a boy who has never really been told no in a way that stuck. He walked right up to the sentry box. Not 2 meters away. Not arm's length. He walked right up and positioned himself directly in front of the guard, close enough that if either of them breathed too hard, they'd have been touching. The chatter behind him dropped away. Not completely, but noticeably. The way a crowd goes a little quieter when it senses the atmosphere shift. The boy held his phone up, filming. He turned it around to selfie mode. He grinned this big, teeth everywhere grin right beside the guard's face. He said something, close, right at him. I was too far away to hear it. Something funny to him, clearly. His friend cracked up. The guard's eyes did not move. Not a flicker. Not a breath. Just that same fixed, forward gaze, like he was looking at something very far away and very important that only he could see. The boy laughed. Waved his hand in front of the guard's face. Snapped his fingers. Nothing. He looked back at his friend, delighted. He turned back, leaned in a little closer, said something else. Whatever it was, he thought it was hilarious. I noticed, and I think a few other people nearby noticed too, that the guard's jaw had tightened, just barely. Not an expression, exactly. More like something being held in place that had considered moving. The boy raised his hand. Not aggressively, I want to be clear about that. He wasn't threatening anyone. He was being stupid in the way teenagers are sometimes stupid, that place where bravado and performance meet and common sense takes a brief holiday. He was going to tap the bearskin cap. He was really going to do it. And that's the moment everything changed. The guard moved. Not to stop the boy's hand, he didn't need to. What he did was far more effective. He stamped. One boot, down, hard. The sound cracked off the stone like a gunshot. Then, he snapped into a new position, still ceremonial, still rigid, but forward, a single deliberate step, his rifle swinging to the front in precise, practiced motion. And, his voice, this low, controlled voice that was somehow both quiet and completely impossible to ignore, said, "Stand clear of the Queen's Guard." That was it. 4 words. No anger in it. No embarrassment, no frustration. Just the absolute, bedrock certainty of someone who has said a thing and meant it completely. The boy stumbled back 2 full steps. His phone nearly went with him. His friend made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a yelp and grabbed his arm. The crowd, which had grown without me noticing, maybe 30 people now, between tourists and a few locals who'd paused, went completely silent for roughly 3 seconds. 3 seconds is a long time when no one is breathing. Then, Derek, of all people, started clapping. Slowly at first. Then, full. Then, the teenage boys joined in, the older one slapping his knee, and Carol lowered her camera to laugh not at the boy, but at the sheer theater of the thing, the perfect delivery, the complete absence of hesitation. The newlywed woman touched her husband's arm and said something in his ear and he nodded, still staring at the guard. The boy with the hoodie had gone a very particular shade of red that is not embarrassment alone, it's the combination of embarrassment and the dawning realization that the crowd has seen everything and will not forget it. He straightened up. Shoved his phone in his pocket. Said sorry, directed vaguely at the air between himself and the guard, and walked back to his friend with as much dignity as a 17-year-old can manufacture in that situation. Which, fair play to him, was slightly more than I'd expected. The guard, for his part, completed the movement, turned, marched a short distance, turned again, the usual drill. Back to the position. Back to the stillness. Back to that fixed, faraway gaze. Like nothing had happened at all. But, here's the part one keep thinking about. After the crowd dispersed, after Derek led his group off toward the memorial, still talking, Carol still photographing everything that held still long enough, I stayed for a while. Just standing there with my cold teacup, now completely empty, something to do with my hands. And I watched the guard. He was back to completely still. Completely unreadable. But I was looking at him differently now, the way you look at a piece of architecture when someone tells you the history behind it, there's the same object, but you're seeing something else. This kid, and he was a kid, I believe that now more than ever, had stood there in the October cold, been laughed at, been filmed, had someone's hand come within inches of his face, and had stayed. Completely, entirely stayed. Until the one moment when staying wasn't enough and he needed to be heard. And then, he'd said exactly the right amount. No more. I've thought about that a lot since. About how much practice it takes to do that. Not just the physical training, I know there's plenty of that. But the internal training. The ability to stand in your own stillness when the world around you is performing for an audience, and not let any of it touch you. Not pride, not irritation, not the very human urge to react. That's not nothing. That's actually something quite extraordinary. I walked back through the park afterward. The leaves were still falling. A pelican was standing on the bridge railing, looking faintly disgusted by everything, which felt appropriate somehow. I thought about texting my friend, telling her what I'd seen. But I found I didn't quite have the words yet. Some things you have to carry for a while before you know what to do with them. I wasn't supposed to be there that day. That sounds like the beginning of something dramatic, and I suppose it is, but the truth is completely ordinary. My flight had been delayed out of Atlanta, I'd missed my connection at Heathrow, and I'd been rerouted through a hotel near Paddington with a voucher for dinner that didn't cover the wine. By the time I made it to London properly, actually in the city, on 2 feet, breathing real air, it was the following morning and I was exhausted and mildly furious in that low-level, constant way you get when travel has chewed you up and spat you somewhere inconvenient. My sister Renata had suggested the walk. She lives in Kensington. Tiny flat, enormous bookshelves, a cat named Harold who hates everyone including her. She's not a sentimental person, Renata. When I showed up at her door rumpled and jet-lagged, she handed me a coffee, told me fresh air would fix it, pointed me toward Hyde Park, and went back to her laptop. That's how I ended up at Wellington Arch on a Tuesday morning in June with a coffee going cold in my hand and absolutely no plan. It was warm. Not British warm, which is a polite fiction, it was actually warm, the kind of early summer day that London occasionally produces as if to apologize for everything else it's done to you weather-wise all year. The sky was a clean, uncomplicated blue. Horse chestnut trees along the park's edge, all in full leaf, rustling in the faint breeze off the Serpentine. Wellington Arch sits at the corner of Hyde Park, just past Apsley House, where the traffic from Park Lane and Knightsbridge and Constitution Hill all collides. Most tourists don't think of it as a royal sight, they're focused on the palace a few hundred meters further on, but the mounted guard at the arch is every bit as ceremonial, every bit as real, as the sentries at the palace gates. There were 2 mounted guards that morning. Horses, full ceremonial tack, the troopers in silver-crested helmets and gleaming cuirasses, sitting absolutely motionless. The horses were better at it than the riders. I always think they have this preternatural stillness that must take years to train, just standing there like expensive statues while London moves around them. I found a spot near the railings, finished my coffee, watched the tourists trickle in. That's when I first noticed the woman. She was traveling alone. That was the first thing. Mid-50s, maybe early 60s, it was hard to tell because she had that particular kind of American confidence that doesn't age in the usual way. Short silver hair, cut close. A blue linen jacket, slightly creased from travel. Good walking shoes, the kind that say you planned this trip carefully. She had a small notebook. A real one, paper, the Moleskine variety. She was writing in it while she walked, which is a skill, and she'd pause every few steps to observe something, jot something down, then keep moving. I liked her immediately, which I didn't expect to feel about a stranger. She stopped at the railings near the mounted guard on the left. The horse was a bayed dark coat, black mane, that rich reddish-brown that catches the sun beautifully. The trooper on its back sat in perfect stillness, eyes forward, expression neutral beneath the gleaming helmet. The woman looked at them for a long time. Not taking photographs. Just looking. She wrote something in her notebook. Then, she did something I'd never seen anyone do before at a royal ceremonial post. She spoke to him. Not loudly, not performing for anyone. Quietly. Like she was having a private conversation in a public space, which is a particular New York or Chicago kind of thing, that ability to be intimate in the middle of everything. She said, and I only heard this because I drifted a little closer and the wind carried it. She said, my son wanted to be you when he was 9. He had the hat and everything. The trooper, of course, said nothing. Didn't move. The woman didn't seem to expect him to. She nodded at the horse. Beautiful animal, she said. Then, she wrote something else in her notebook and stepped back, giving the space to the couple who had arrived beside her and immediately started arguing about camera angles. I stood there for a moment, caught between minding my own business and the strange, persistent feeling that I'd just witnessed something private. She settled onto a bench near the arch, kept writing. A pigeon landed near her feet and she looked at it without any of the irritation most people have for London pigeons, which in my opinion are running a decades-long confidence racket and deserve every piece of irritation they get. But the woman just observed it, wrote something, and the pigeon wandered off. It was maybe 20 minutes later that the day shifted. A group arrived. Larger this time, 12, 13 people, all American, from what I could hear. They were on some sort of paid tour, because there was a guide leading them, young British guy, cheerful, professional, doing his job. He was explaining the history of the arch, the significance of the mounted guards, the training required. Most of the group was listening attentively. 2 of them weren't. They were brothers, I established this later, from context. Mid-20s. One taller, one stockier. The kind of brothers who exist in permanent low-level competition with each other, each performing for the other's benefit more than anyone else's. They had matching brand trainers and the stocky one had a camera setup that was frankly excessive for a tourist, the kind of rig you see travel bloggers use, with a small microphone attached. He was filming. Running commentary, low-voiced, for what I assumed was some kind of social media thing. His brother was doing most of the physical bits. He'd walk up near the guard, do something slightly silly, walk back. The camera brother would capture it, narrate it. Nothing too bad at first. Normal tourist stuff, elevated by the presence of a camera and the desire for content. Then, the taller brother, the performer, decided he needed a better shot. Or a better moment. He walked slowly up to the horse, right up close, and reached out his hand. He was going to touch it. Here's what you need to understand about the horses used by the household cavalry. These are not gentle animals. They're not dangerous in the way that makes headlines, they're extraordinarily well trained, brilliantly disciplined, remarkable in their steadiness. But they are horses. Large, powerful, flight instinct animals with minds of their own, and anything that startles them unexpectedly has consequences that go beyond embarrassment. For the animal, for the rider, for anyone standing nearby. The brother clearly didn't know this. Or didn't think about it. Or didn't care, in the way that people sometimes don't care about things they can't directly imagine the consequence of. His hand went out toward the horse's face. The trooper's voice came before I even registered the movement. Not loud. Controlled. But, absolutely, completely serious, the kind of voice that cuts through sound rather than rising above it. Sir. Do not touch the horse. The brother's hand froze. He looked up, startled. There's something about hearing a voice from a person who has been completely silent that hits differently than any amount of noise. The trooper was still in position, still formal, but his eyes were now directly on the brother. Not threatening. Not angry. Just fixed. Absolutely fixed. The camera brother stopped filming. The tour guide had gone very still. The taller brother lowered his hand. Stepped back. Said sorry in the automatic way that means I'm surprised, not I'm sorry, but at least it came out. He walked back to the group. Silence for a moment. Then, the tour guide cleared his throat and resumed the history of Wellington Arch with admirable composure, like he'd been quietly waiting for the interruption to end so he could get back to the good part. But, this isn't the moment I want to tell you about. That was just the setup. The part that stayed with me came 20 minutes later, after the tour group had moved on and the space around the arch had cleared a little. I was still on a bench, not the same one as the woman with the notebook. She'd moved further along when the stocky brother came back. Alone this time. Without the camera. He stood at the railings and looked at the trooper for a long moment. The trooper, of course, remained exactly as he was. Eyes forward, motionless, the horse beneath him equally still. The brother reached into his jacket pocket. He took out a small American flag pin. The kind you buy at airports. He looked at it for a second. Then, he stepped forward, not too close, and placed it carefully on the top rail of the railing nearest the guard. Not on the guard, not on the horse. Just near. Respectfully near. He stepped back. Looked at the trooper for another moment. Then, he said, quietly, "Thank you for what you do." And walked away. I turned around and the woman with the notebook was standing near me. She'd apparently moved back this way without me noticing, which tells you something about how caught up I was in what I was watching. She was looking at the spot where the pin was sitting on the railing. She said. Not to me, exactly. More to the general air. Then, she sat back down on the bench and wrote something in the notebook, and I wanted very badly to know what it was, but that's the thing about notebooks, they're private in a way phones have never quite managed to be. The mounted trooper remained perfectly still. The bay horse flicked an ear. The little flag pin sat on the railing in the June sunshine. And the city moved around, all of it, taxis, tourists, cyclists, pigeons, completely indifferent to the fact that something small and true had just happened. I went back to my sister's flat around noon. Harold the cat hissed at me from the bookshelf. Renata asked if the walk had helped. I said yes. I didn't try to explain what I'd seen. Some things you need to carry for a while before you know how to share them. What I kept thinking about, on the tube, watching my own reflection in the window, was the difference between the two brothers. Same trip. Same morning. Same moment at the railing. One of them had pushed, because that's what you do when you're performing. The other had come back, alone, without the camera. That second version wasn't for anyone. That's the version that was real. I've been back to London 3 times since that June. I always walk through Hyde Park if I can. I always slow down near Wellington Arch. The horses are always there. The troopers, always still. The city always moving. And every time I look at that spot on the top railing, that specific spot, even though the pin is long gone, carried away by the wind or collected by a cleaner or pocketed by someone who needed a little American flag more than that railing did, I still look. Because that's what we do with the moments that matter. We go back to the spot. We stand there. We remember. My son, I have one, he's 12 now, hates travel but loves history, asked me once what my favorite thing I'd ever seen was. He was expecting something grand. A monument, maybe. A skyline. I told him, a man who came back without his camera. He thought about it for a second. What did he do? He said thank you. My son nodded like that was a completely satisfying answer, and went back to his book. Kids are sometimes smarter about these things than we give them credit for. If I'm being completely honest, I almost didn't go out that day. My knee had been bad all week, old injury, nothing interesting, just the kind of thing that gets worse with rain, and London in November is basically a subscription service for rain, and I'd already talked myself into staying in with tea and a book twice that morning. The third time I considered going out, I decided to just go, because if I didn't, I was going to finish the book and then have nothing to do and be in a terrible mood about it. So I put on my coat, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and walked down to Horse Guards Parade. I do this sometimes when I'm in the city. It's a particular kind of calm, that space, the old parade ground, the archway, the sentries in their boxes. Something about the sheer continuity of it. The fact that people have stood watch there since the 17th century. It puts your bad knee and your Tuesday mood in fairly reasonable perspective. It was mid-morning. A Wednesday. The kind of midweek day where the tourist presence is lighter. You get a different crowd on Wednesdays, somehow. More wanderers than planners. People who have ended up somewhere unexpected and are quietly pleased about it. I found a spot under the archway, out of the drizzle, and watched. There are 2 mounted sentries at Horse Guards, positioned on either side of the main arch, in shallow alcoves just big enough for a horse and rider. The one on the right, that morning, was on a gray horse. Silver-white, almost luminescent in the dull November light. Magnificent animal. The trooper on its back sat in the usual complete stillness, the cuirass catching what little light there was, the plumes of the helmet motionless in the still air under the archway. The one on the left had a chestnut horse. Darker, warmer. The trooper there was slightly broader in build, which you could tell even under all the ceremonial uniform. I watched the usual rhythms for a while. Tourists arriving. Photographs taken. A French school group, impeccably behaved, listening to a teacher explain something with efficient passion while the students took notes and looked vaguely competitive about it. A Japanese couple who photographed everything with the focused patience of people who are getting it right on the first try. Then, the Americans arrived. Not a tour group this time. A family. A proper one, the full range of generations, which you don't always see. Grandparents, a man in a Patagonia jacket and a woman in a red coat, moving slowly but looking at everything. Parents, the father carrying both a backpack and a toddler on his hip, the mother managing a pushchair that kept catching on the cobblestones. Then, 3 kids, 2 boys, maybe 8 and 11, and a girl. The girl was 5 or 6. Maybe 7 on the young side. She had a yellow raincoat, the hood up despite the fact that the rain had mostly stopped, and she was wearing the kind of expression that very small children sometimes have when they're trying very hard to understand something enormous. I noticed her the way you notice something that is trying to figure the world out. Her family spread across the parade ground in that natural way families do, the grandparents moving toward the archway, the mother wrestling with the pushchair over the cobblestones, the boys running ahead toward the gate, the father somewhere in between trying to be in 3 places at once. The girl stood where she'd stopped walking. In front of the gray horse. She was looking up at it the way you'd look at a mountain. Not afraid, I want to be clear about that. There was no fear in her face. It was something more like awe, which is different, because awe has this quality of drawing you toward a thing rather than away from it. She looked at the horse for a long time. Then, she looked at the trooper. He was looking straight ahead, of course. Over her head, over the parade ground, at something impossibly far away. The girl tilted her head to one side. Her mother noticed her standing there and started pushing the pushchair over, maneuvering across the cobblestones with increasing exasperation. Her grandmother was already making her way toward the alcove. The older boy, the 11-year-old, had drifted back to see what his sister was doing, the way older siblings do when they've run ahead and then felt the faint pull of family responsibility. The girl didn't move. She was still looking at the trooper. Then, she did something that made her grandmother stop walking. She waved. Not to get his attention, she'd already decided she had it, or at least that she was directing something toward him. It was a real wave. Deliberate, small, the kind a child gives a person they think deserves one. Her hand came up, 4 fingers and a thumb, and moved back and forth. The trooper did not wave back. Of course he didn't. He couldn't, wouldn't, never would. But, here is the thing I have thought about many times since, his eyes moved. Just slightly. Down, briefly, in the direction of the small yellow figure below him. Not breaking position, nothing that would register as movement from any distance. But, I was standing close enough, under the archway, that I saw it. The tiniest, almost involuntary acknowledgement of something happening in the world directly in front of him. It was gone instantly. Eyes forward again. Face still. Completely composed. But, I saw it. I'm certain I saw it. The girl's hand came down. She studied him for another moment with that level, serious face. Then, she asked her grandmother, who had arrived beside her, red coat slightly damp at the shoulders from the drizzle, why doesn't he move? Her grandmother started to answer, but the girl's father had arrived by then, too, toddler still on his hip, and he crouched down beside her. I could hear this part clearly because the family had settled right near where I was standing and weren't particularly quiet. He's a guard, the father said. It's his job to stand still and protect the palace. The girl considered this. Does he get cold? Her father glanced up at the trooper. Probably. A little. Can he go inside if he's cold? Not yet. He has to wait until his shift is done. The girl absorbed this information with the gravity of a parliament member receiving a policy brief. That's very hard, she said finally. It is, her father agreed. She looked at the trooper again. Then, she unzipped her yellow raincoat. Her mother saw what was happening approximately 1 second before anyone else did, because mothers always do. But the girl Lily had already reached into the inside pocket of her raincoat and taken out a small, slightly squashed cereal bar. The kind wrapped in yellow foil. She'd probably been carrying it since breakfast. She walked right up to the alcove. Not touching. Not crossing any line. She stopped at the right distance. 5-year-olds don't always have great spatial judgment, but Lily had been watching the horse carefully enough to understand that proximity had limits, and she held the cereal bar up toward the trooper, offering it. You can have this, she said. In case you're hungry. Her mother had arrived beside her and was doing the thing parents do in public when their child has done something that is simultaneously slightly inappropriate and completely devastating, that combination of apology and swallowed emotion that requires the use of both hands and neither quite works. Lily, sweetheart, the trooper, of course, could not accept the cereal bar. Could not bend down. Could not break position to take anything from anyone, least of all a 5-year-old with yellow foil and good intentions. He didn't move. He didn't speak. But, and I will stake whatever credibility I have as a witness on this, something happened on his face. Something that wasn't quite a smile, because it couldn't be, and wasn't visible as an expression in any definable way, but was something. A softening at the corner of the eye. A fractional change in the set of his mouth. Something that a person shows in their face when they are working very hard to hold it still against something that has caught them completely off guard. The cereal bar stayed in Lily's hand. Her family gently extracted her from the situation. Her grandmother took her hand. Her mother pulled her close. Her father said something quiet about how the guard was working, how he wasn't allowed to take things, how it was very kind of her. The 11-year-old was watching with the expression of someone who was both embarrassed by association and also aware, somewhere in the part of him that hasn't yet been covered over by adolescence, that something worth watching is happening. Lily allowed herself to be moved away, looking back at the trooper over her shoulder. She waved again. Same as before. And I watched the trooper for that moment. That specific moment when the small yellow figure turned away and the family moved off toward the gate. He blinked. Once. Slowly. Eyes still forward. That was all. But, if you've been around enough people, if you've watched them long enough, in enough situations, you learn to read the things that can't be said. And, what I read in that single slow blink was something that I recognized. It was the face of someone who has been moved, and has nowhere to put it, and has to stand still anyway. I walked home the long way, back through St. James's Park. The pelicans were out again. There always seemed to be pelicans, doing their imperious pelican thing on the rocks near the water. The trees had mostly gone bare by that point in November, just the skeleton shapes of them against the white sky. I thought about Lily and her cereal bar for a long time. About the strange logic of a child's kindness, which doesn't ask whether the offering will be accepted. Which doesn't calculate the practicality. Which just sees a person standing in the cold and thinks, I have something, and you might need it. And I thought about the trooper. About what it costs to do that job, not the physical part, not the training and the drills and the discipline. The other part. The part where you stand in front of thousands of people, day after day, and receive their attention and their testing and their mockery and their cameras, and sometimes their cruelty, and you hold all of it at a distance, and then a child offers you a cereal bar and you have nowhere to put that either. The holding of all of it. The absolute, extraordinary holding. That's the thing that nobody films. Nobody makes a reel about. Nobody talks about on the walk home. But it's there. Every single day, in every still figure behind every ceremonial railing, in every city where people stand guard over something older and larger than themselves. I found out later, from Renata, who knew someone who'd done a stint in ceremonial duty years ago, before a different career, that the troopers are specifically trained to maintain composure around children. That children are considered the most genuinely unpredictable element of public duty, not because they're threatening, but because they're honest. They say and do things that adults have spent years learning to suppress, and there's no defense against honesty that doesn't require something from you. The training, apparently, involves learning to treat the public as whether something that happens around you, that you exist within, but that does not alter your essential position. But even whether, if you stand in it long enough, leaves a mark. There's a photograph on my desk at home. I didn't take it myself, a stranger posted it online, tagged to horse guards, and I found it the week after my visit. It wasn't taken from where I was standing. It's taken from slightly further back, a wide shot of the alcove under the arch. In it, you can see the gray horse. The trooper in his silver helmet. And, in the lower left corner, in yellow, a small figure with her hand raised. The trooper's face is not visible at the angle. But the horse's eye is. Clear and dark and alert. And if you look at the direction of that eye, and I have looked many times, it is looking just slightly down and to the left. At the yellow figure. Even the horse, apparently, couldn't quite maintain perfect composure. I've never found the family online. Never found Lily. I looked once, briefly, and then decided I didn't really want to. Some things are better as what they were: a specific morning, a cereal bar in yellow foil, a man who blinked once because he had nowhere to put what he felt. My neighbor asked me once, after I'd mentioned this story, we were talking over the garden fence, the way you do, what I thought the whole Royal Guard thing was actually for. Ceremonially, she meant. In the modern world. What purpose it serves to have people stand motionless in the cold while tourists photograph them. I thought about it for a moment. Then, I said, I think it's so we have something that doesn't flinch when we do. She considered that. That's either very comforting or very sad, she said. Maybe both, I said. Maybe that's exactly the point.